You know, it used to be, when it came to machine polishing, the only pads available were these large pads like this. If you wanted to work into a thin panel or a tight area, you had to use something like this and work by hand, and your tool is basically elbow grease. Well, now Lake Country has introduced some micro pads, which makes working those thin panels and tight areas easier than ever. Mike Phillips with AutoGeek.com, and we're on location in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin, and I have with me here Dave Patterson. He's the technical manager of new product development for Lake Country Manufacturing, the world's largest manufacturer of buffing pads for all the cool things we do. Dave, how you doing?
I'm doing awesome. Thanks for being here.
You know, this is so cool because when I started out, all we had was basically rotary buffers. The cyclo was around, and these other things called a gem. That's a big orbital.
Yep.
And the pad sizes were huge. And about the only thing that was easy to buff with those large pads was the hood, the trunk, the side of the door, because the pad was so freaking big. But now, because of the technology and the tools that have been introduced, we have better tools, and we had the need for smaller pads. So what did you guys do?
So we came up with a full line of pads for small rotary applications or for the new Roof S hybrid. We utilized the Force line of pads, which hybrid foams along with the microfiber technology, and we created that or filled that gap that wasn't there before.
So out in front of me, what I see here, these are 1-inch pads and 2-inch pads.
Yeah.
And that makes them perfect for doing things like the A-pillar, getting to the thin, tight areas, especially on exotic cars, you know?
Yep.
And before, again, back then, everything for those types of things had to be done by hand. Yep. You know, and that's okay. It's important to have hand skills, the ability to use your hand to work out defects like swirls, water spots, and scratches by hand. But it tires me out, and I know it tires you out. Yeah, and now we got tools to make our lives easy.
Yeah, it's great. And you know, just like anything else, is you think it's just a small pad, just like every other pad, but there is actually a significant amount of work that went into it based on the shape and thickness of it. Because if it's too thick, it gets on a rotary tool at least, it gets a twisting type of a movement where the pad actually grips the surface and the whole pad is twisting as it's spinning, so it wants to knot like a pigtail.
Sure.
And if they're too thin, the weight of the polisher, even if you're using a smaller rotary like a PE8, it tends to want to just collapse the pad.
Just collapses it.
Yeah. So even though it's just a very basic, simple concept, there was a lot of thought process put into thickness and foam choice and how we were going to set that up.
You know, and I've actually used some pads that are what you would call cylindrical.
Yep.
And the reason for the taper, at least from what I noticed, is it causes the pad to mushroom out, or if you have a cylindrical pad, it will mushroom in, and it reduces your footprint. So actually the shape of the pad, that taper, is there for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. So for one, it's very precise. You know, for tight areas, you want that edge where you can slide up in there. But just like you were saying, a straight edge pad, if you video or take a picture of it, it actually
collapses in on itself.
Yeah, it collapses in on itself. And then the other thing is, everybody has a little bit different technique, right or wrong, whatever it is, it works or it doesn't.
Yeah.
But one thing is when you use heavier pressure, the pad ends up coming up onto the sides and still creates a little buffer.
It mushrooms out.
It mushrooms out, yeah.
And that's actually what you want to do. You don't want it to shrink in, you want it to go out.
Yep.
And I think the reason for that, and you're the pad expert, is because when you remove the substance at a taper like that, the pad can easily flex outward instead of bending inward.
Exactly, yep.
Okay, so now this pad line, of course, you get different types of foam, and even I see a microfiber pad there. And again, this is back to the idea of having the right tool for the job. So you've got the cutting pads, you've got the fiber pads, and the softer pads. Let's go ahead and walk through the different colors and what they mean to the average person detailing the car.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say most of the people are going to choose their 3 core pads, something along those lines. When you get into really small pads, we have a full variety. You don't necessarily need to do 5 steps, or you don't necessarily need 5 pads, but there is differentiation between different ones to maximize whatever polish or compound that you're using, along with the type of paint. So just like the Force pads, we use the red for waxing and sealing and maybe an all-in-one. The black is for very fine finishing when you just can't get your paint to finish without micromarring. Your white is going to be a standard go-to polishing pad. It finishes almost flawlessly on anything. The orange is going to be your light cutting pad. I find that a lot of people, even though it's light cutting, they typically like an orange or a white. So they choose one or the other. I use both, but.
Sure. Well, every paint is different. Sometimes you got to dial in your process by doing a little testing first to see which pad works best on that paint. Of course, with the chemical you're using, different compounds, polishes.
Yeah, and it'll make a difference whether you're using a rotary, which this is a rotary tool also, or if you're using this as a DA. So the gray is what your heavy cut is, but what's nice about this is it's a very firm foam, like what we spoke about in other videos, but I like to use the term buoyant. So when you start getting into these small pads, they tend to crush very fast. And when you use the gray pad, it's very nice for heavy compounding because obviously you're using a little pressure and it stays buoyant and it doesn't collapse.
I like that word.
Yeah,
buoyant.
Thank you. But yeah, and for heavy cutting, we're obviously utilizing microfiber.
Sure. So the fibers actually act as a form of abrasive to work with whatever abrasive technology you're using with your compounder polish or cleaner wax.
Yeah.
And so you got two things cutting for you, but because it's microscopic in size and it's actually very soft and gentle, it'll actually finish out really nice too at the same time.
Yeah.
Unlike, say, a wool pad, which does tend to want to just keep on cutting and cutting and cutting.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, it's really nice that we have these tools available because I remember back in the old days when you got into these thin areas or tight areas, you could do everything but machine, but now you're back to working by hand.
Yep.
And actually, one of the things I tell people is when it comes to clear coats, because clear coats are scratch sensitive, which is hard for some people to wrap their brain around because clear coats, generally speaking, are harder than traditional single stage paints. Okay, so that would be lacquers and enamels. Even though we do have some softer clears, generally speaking, they are harder, but even though they're harder, they scratch easy. And that can be hard to wrap your mind around. How can something hard scratch easy? But they do.
Yep.
And so working by hand, it actually takes more skill, in my opinion, to work by hand on something that's hard and scratch sensitive than it does to turn a machine on and let the foam do the work for you.
Absolutely.
So nowadays, people get into detailing. They actually need less skill to turn out amazing results than they would if they have to actually hone their skills working by hand.
Yeah, absolutely.
So hand me that large wool pad. So this is kind of cool. I just wanted to take and show everybody that's watching this video. We went from this to this. In a short amount of time.
Less than a decade. Maybe you could technically maybe consider it 5 or 6 years, but in less than a decade, that's what we've gone through.
And before we had these, guys would try sometimes to do these thin panels like this by going up on edge, and you know what that's going to do?
Oh yeah.
As sooner or later, you're going to do what I call a whoops. Whoops.
Yep.
And that means you're going to start seeing the color cut come off on your pad, or you're going to be leaving swirls in there, you're going to burn through the edge. Yep. So these smaller tools with these micro pads solves everybody's problems. So where can people get more information about these mini pads that Lake Country's come up with?
You can check us out on our website, www.lakecountrymfg, as in manufacturing.com. You'll find these in our product page with a full description and all the specifics for every pad.
You know, when it comes to polishing paint, pads are like tools. You need the right pad for the tool to get the job done. And Lake Country, you guys spot on. You always have the best pads on the market. You can trust the name Lake Country when it's on the pad.
Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome.